Okay, I always thought you never went after lunch, so sorry about that. But hopefully this panel will keep us all really engaged. So as Jerry said, my name is Maria Laskaris, and I want to just take a moment just to give a little snippet of my background. I'm not perhaps a traditional presenter at the MUPS. I have the privilege this year of serving as the interim director of the Hopkins Center at Dartmouth. And I'm joined by my colleague Evelynn Ellis, our Vice President for Institutional Diversity and Equity. Prior to my work in the arts, I actually spent over 20 years in the front lines of building the Dartmouth student community, the last 18 years as first director and then Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid. So I have the wonderful fortune of bringing, I think, a rich history and on-the-ground experience with what it means to actually build a diverse community. And so when Jerry shared the topic for this MUPS conference, I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that we do to build a community, as well as the work that we do to make our community truly inclusive of the kinds of wonderful students I think that we just saw and had the privilege of hearing from this morning and this afternoon. So our panel is called Connecting with Students or Not, and it's supposed to be about some of our experiences and our experiments. And we, as a group, decided this wasn't only telling the success stories, but perhaps some of the war stories and some of the war wounds. And I know from personal experience, we at Dartmouth have a few of our own. I think a subtitle for this conversation could also be that change is hard, especially at a place that holds fast to its traditions. Just a little bit about our history at Dartmouth. It's a bit of a case study. We're approaching our 250th anniversary, so that's super exciting. When Dean Perez this morning was talking about Nebraska, I figured it was probably about 100 or so years ago. I said, wow, that could have easily been New Hampshire, except we had more Canadians than you had here in New Hampshire. But essentially, the picture of Nebraska was very similar to the picture of New Hampshire. We have no Schuyler, though, in New Hampshire yet. So in many ways, you here in Nebraska are much further along than we are in New Hampshire in terms of a diverse state. A couple things about New Hampshire, those of you who might know about us. We are the state of live free or die. So we are a state of rugged individualists. We have, we like to say at Dartmouth, the granite of New Hampshire in our muscles and our brains. So again, think about that and think about trying to change when you have granite in your muscles and your brains. So it wasn't until 1972, quite frankly, that Dartmouth really took very bold and very forward-looking steps to make a change in the makeup of its student body. Although we were founded in 1769 by the Reverend Eleazar Wheelock and Samson Occam, a Mohegan Indian, with the express purpose to educate the youth of Native Americans and the English settlers in our community, a surrounding community, it really wasn't until the 1970s that we really began to make good in very intentional ways on that commitment. It was in 1972 that women were first admitted to Dartmouth. We were the last of the Ivy League schools to go co-ed, and we still have some of the scars and wounds from that experience. So again, change can be hard at a place that holds fast to its traditions and its ways of being. Fast forward today, Dartmouth is a vastly different school than it was in 1972. Certainly in 1769, we have nowhere near the critical mass of students that Nebraska or Arizona or my panelists from Florida and North Carolina have. But I think as we think about our goals and our aspirations to be a place that trains its students for lives of leadership and impact, one of our core values and core principles is that the diversity of our community is absolutely essential to the educational experience that we're providing our students. So in the front lines as leading a staff charged with making those decisions to shape our community, we thought long and hard about what it meant to build a diverse community, who we invited into our community and why, and what we hoped would be the end result. So fast forward today, our student body is 50-50 in terms of the percent of men and women. Students of color make up close to 40% of our student body. And again, bear in mind that the state of New Hampshire is probably 97-98% white. So we are certainly an island in the state of New Hampshire, in northern New England, but feel very, very strongly about the work that we do at Dartmouth and the importance of the diversity of our community. I think one of our speakers early on, our panelists, mentioned the importance of broadening our definition of diversity. And certainly we thought and we do think a great deal about that as we make decisions one at a time as to the students that we will include in our community. So it's not enough to look at all African American students as having come from the same experience, all Native American students as having come from the same experience, all Caucasian students as having come from the same experience or wanting the same things out of their education. So that was very much a part and parcel of the work that is going on as we think about what it means to build this diverse community. Now, as I said, the subtitle here could be that change is hard, because change at Dartmouth has been hard. And I don't think any of us, I look at Evelynn, I look at my colleague Joe, any of us would say we have succeeded in fully realizing the promise of that diversity. I think looking back, reflecting on my time in admissions and sort of reflecting on Dartmouth's history, I think one of the things that we didn't anticipate is that as we built diversity in the student community, I don't think we had the same intentionality to think about the systems and structures and programs in place to make a community actually more inclusive and welcoming of that diversity. So I think we have seen lots of sort of clashes and stress points because as our student body has changed, the rest of our community has been a bit slower to change. And so that has been, I think, a real challenge for us, but also a real opportunity. And I think the work that Evelynn and her colleagues have been doing, really helping us as an institution to really address what it means to truly be inclusive, I think has been one of the most important parts of our work. So it's not enough just to build that diverse community structurally, right? How many students of color, how many first-generation to college students, what % of your students are Pell Grant recipients? These are the numbers and metrics that colleges so often have to report on and often celebrate. But I think the more important questions that we need to be asking ourselves, and it's harder to measure, are we making progress on truly becoming more inclusive? So I'm going to toss the ball over to Evelynn to talk a little bit about, from her perspective, some of the work happening at Dartmouth. Thank you.
It is so hard to even think about talking after listening to those students. But I have to. First of all, greetings. Greetings from the Green Mountains of Vermont. That's where I live now. My family says I'm going to Canada following the slaves. And they say that because I'm originally from Alabama. I also greet you from the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Those twin states are very different from each other. And if you are a diverse person, you learn to navigate the differences in the Green Mountains of Vermont and the White Mountains of New Hampshire. But also greetings from the Pennsylvania State University, because it is the 23 plus years at the Penn State University that they helped me develop that grit that the Black Belt of Alabama gave me. And it's all of those things and all of those places that I am so sure that I bring to every conversation with another human being, to every interaction, to whatever job that I do. It is what I experienced in the past and what I'm experiencing in those twin states in New England that really helps me shape my thought around diversity and inclusion. And just a little, since we're doing full disclosure here, I should also tell you that I am an administrator with a doctoral degree in higher education administration. 2 of my degrees are actually from where? The performing arts. I'm a classical clarinetist. And I'm also reminded often that you can't think like a musician all the time. Musicians, we love order. We love cooperation. We like people get on the team or get off the bus. and as an administrator, I have to remember not everyone wants to even be on the bus. So thank you for having me be a part of this. It's an incredible opportunity. And I'm only going to do 4 things, and I sort of like to put my head around what the things I'm going to do. And I call them just 4 quick points. where we are in working with diverse student populations. First of all, I remind us all that we made some assumptions years ago. Whether we're talking about Penn State, Arizona State, Dartmouth, it doesn't matter. Some of us assumed that if we did work and obtain a diverse population of students, that what would automatically follow would be inclusion, equity, and sometimes I will say intellectual, social competence. We thought those things would come with diversity, and we were all wrong. So what we ended up doing is bringing those of us who were successful, bringing diverse students and their families. We don't just bring students to a campus, diverse students to our campus, but we never, in the second point, we didn't prepare colleges and universities for diverse populations, and I think we still find ourselves there. We expected this total voluntary assimilation, and I think students talked about it, where people just check their identities at the doors of our institutions. Well, guess what? I didn't and they didn't. And when we got this group of really incredible minds who were diverse, who would not check their identities at the door, we started to run into what I call diversity hard knocks, where the institutions wanted to stay the same, but they wanted to look a little different. Society doesn't even work that way. So colleges and universities would not be successful in doing this. So one of the things we have to do at Dartmouth, and I think it's going to be another 250 years as we work on it, is we as institutions, regardless of how strong our traditions are, and we have so many, and so does Penn State, those traditions have to change, because the diversity will give us its richness, its rewards, if we provide an opportunity, an environment where people aren't checking their identities at the door. Third point, performing arts for our community. Beside the fact that I'm a musician, performing arts for our community has always been a united and a comforting force for us. It's just downright spiritual for us. That ability to have the chance to sing, to do theater, it is the performing arts. It's like a church for us, where when we are stressed, when we are feeling as though the world is caving in, where do you think we go in addition to church? Some of us in temples and other places. It is the performing arts. So your job and this march toward diversity, toward inclusivity, is as important as mine. Because one thing I do know is on the days when I feel as though I'm not quite getting there as the Vice President of Institutional Diversity and Equity, meaning the things I want to accomplish, they aren't quite coming together the way that I want them to. I know they can go to the Hopkins Center and talk to Bill T. Jones if he's there. They can go to the Hopkins Centers and experience the joy of Ab and Ellie, and it's not people just about dancing. It is the heart and the soul, sometimes my parents would say, of our people. So as you think about your programming, as some of you have said, it's more important now than ever that diversity component be there, because it will be the place that we will go when everything else feels so shut down. Last thing, then I'm going to turn you over to somebody else. Our responsibility, my responsibility, your responsibility. This is not a time when we can blink. This is not a time when we can blink. And I say that because it's so uncertain now, and I watch this and sometimes, well, oftentimes, disappointed by when the tide sort of shifts, when this diversity, inclusion thing, it's not the most popular thing. I have watched colleges and universities blink, meaning they find an alternative path. They sort of play it down a bit. I'm asking you, don't do that. As uncertain as our times are, now build your diversity component. Reach out to students, reach out to the faculty and staff working with them, show them the connection to humanity, decency, and you're right, civility. And we can do that. It is our responsibility. And there's no better place to do it than the Performing Arts Centers. Thank you.
I'm Jessica from the University of Florida, also in the MUPS group. I do want to send a quick shout out and a thank you to both Brian and Matt for the phone call a few weeks ago of, hey, we've got this thing coming up and I think it would be a great opportunity for you to join us. And I say thank you to them in that this is not my everyday work. My primary role on the University of Florida campus is to work with our student organizations and their campus events. So the students that we have formed all these communities and all of their programs that they are doing. And we recognize that they would not exist without our student organizations, and our student organizations would not be successful, would not be able to share their stories the way that those 6 students shared their stories with us without the help of that team. So big shout out to them. But I want to help paint the landscape, just as Dartmouth did, of what our campus looks like, similar to a lot of your campuses. The numbers are going to be numbers, but I just want to paint the landscape so that we can talk about really connecting with students, because before we can connect with them, we actually have to know who our students are. We have to give them the space to tell their stories. So a little bit about the University of Florida, for those of you that don't know, 52,000 students, give or take a few. 83% of our students self-report that they are involved or engaged in our campus in some capacity. I would tell you that through my work, most of them are through student organizations, as we have over 1,000 of them on our campus. Within the last 10 years, we have grown from 400 student organizations to now over 1,000. Our students are really wanting to connect with one another and finding identity in those student organizations. They are finding people that have the same major as them, that maybe came from the same hometown, to start some of those conversations, and then they become lifelong friends. They go to each other's events, they join other organizations. They're all part of this network, which is very cool to see. So out of our 1,000 student organizations, about 15% of them, 150, are connected to either religious, spiritual groups, cultural in nature, really personal identity issues. So they may not be related to the academics or recreation or leisure, but they're true identities that our students have connected with. That's a lot of organizations that are based solely on identities. All of our student organizations, when they want to do something on campus besides have their standing meeting, they'll create what's called an event permit. That comes through my office. We take a look at all of those. Last year, we processed over 4,000 of them. A lot of things are happening on our campus. Of those 4,000, 1,600 of them are true, big, elaborate events. The others are typically marketing type events that don't need a lot of support, but 1,600 events that need support, need constant help and resources from the partners just like you in this room. 147 of those events were related to one or more of 9 cultural month celebrations that we do on campus. So we have 9 cultural month celebrations that happen throughout the year, the first one starting typically the middle of September, but 147 culture-related events just within those 9 months. That does not include each of the organizations that has a week, a celebration week, or whatever type of week that they might do they will host their own events within that single week. We also do 5 welcome assemblies, all culturally based, at the beginning of each fall semester. So just a few numbers. I'm not going to quiz you on them later, but just to give you a little bit of a picture of what our landscape looks like. And I tell you that this whole section, and all of us are here to talk about how do we connect with our students. We've got to know who our students are. We've got to know what it is that they want. I don't have the answers, but with those numbers and with that landscape, we can see that there's opportunity. There's a ton of stuff out there. Our students want it. They want to be part of events. They want to be part of programs. They want to be part of each other's events and programs and conversations. The opportunity is there. We just have to do our best to take advantage of it and to work with those students.
I have a modest grudge, a modest grief with MUPS. We're in Nebraska. I have a modest beef with MUPS. You know, we tend to highlight our achievements, and there are many, but we highlight those achievements. We rarely shine the spotlight on our failures, so I like to do that right now. And I'm talking about presenting in particular, and what I'm talking about on the University of Florida campus. And this seems appropriate to me here on the Great Plains. This is where I think our presenting program is, the University of Florida, when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I think we're in Nowheresville. And I'd like you to breathe that in for a minute. Breathe in the air of Nowheresville. It's sweet, and it's inoffensive, and it's devoid of industry, right? You know, and I'm using some hyperbole here. You know Michael, you know Elizabeth. We do good work at the University of Florida. We have a great program. But it was in the words of Lance Perez today, where he said, and I want to get this right, we need to make diversity and inclusion an initiative, not an event, or in our case, events. And that's in our world, I think, how we look at our efforts. You know, I could point to so many events, so many performances that we put on that meet the criteria of diversity and inclusion, but it's not an initiative, right? It's a series of events that have some cohesiveness, but it's not a mission. It's not a driving force. It's not changing the way we do business. It's something that we find an artist, and oftentimes I think we try to retrofit some kind of a master class or some kind of an outreach. And we're going to change that. That's not how we're going to move forward in the future. And that's why Jessica is here. She's here partly on UFPA's dime, because I think that it's vital that we change the environment in the University of Florida campus, that we create an initiative, not a series of events, that we commit to diversity and inclusion, and that we come up with clever and thoughtful programming. I want to share with you, some of you heard me say this last night. I was still in Minnesota about a year and a half ago. And it was sometime around lunch. I was in the car. And they were playing the Aspen Ideas Festival on Minnesota Public Radio. And I came into the middle of the interview. And I could tell they were talking about theater. That's all I had. And the woman being interviewed, the interviewer asked her, what do you dislike? And she said, I'll tell you what I dislike. I hate Spielberg movies. Wow, I can't say I've ever heard anyone say that. And the interviewer said, well, why do you hate Spielberg movies? She said, I'll tell you, because they're fascist. She said, we all laugh at the same time, we all cry at the same time, we all shriek at the same time in the same extent. And that's fascism. Fascism is meant to make you feel small, make you feel insignificant, and make you feel like everybody else. And that's what Spielberg movies do. She said, I want artistic experiences that are humanist, where we all share the same framework, but we have different takeaways. Where we all can talk about what we experience together, but the impact is different depending on your background, depending on your experience. And that's what Lemon did with those students today. They each told a story within the same framework. I got to ask LaShawn, they all had the same framework, but you felt the difference in the stories. That's what we're going to do with the type of diversity and outreach. I want to quote our president-elect about our upcoming diversity initiatives. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be great, and you're going to love it. But as Jessica said, I want to point out successes too. And this is due to Matt's good work. If you don't know Matt, you need to get to know Matt. He's really involved in our diversity and our outreach and our inclusion. And where he's been doing this, and I think this is genius, is through our student rentals. All those efforts that Jessica was talking about, these kind of performances are happening on our stages every night. That across our campus, we've made a commitment to giving a town hall voice to all the student groups. I think that's something that gets lost in our presenting conversations. The importance of rentals, the importance of community. And Matt and his team not only rent the space, they provide the expertise to make sure that the production is a success. These are all sorts of different evenings, different events, of different groups. These are all taken on Matt's phone, by the way, because he just catalogs them. But how cool is that? That through the rental events, we are the town hall of campus. And now, if we can have our programming, our presenting program catch up with that, we will make a huge impact at the University of Florida. Thank you.
I'm Maureen Reagan from Krannert Center for the Performing Arts at the University of Illinois. And you heard Mike Ross speak this morning about exploring cultural centers and strategies of being, positing that cultural centers and programs can create meaningful context for exchange of ideas, of cultural backgrounds and experience, and of political and social perspectives, and frames within which individuals can more purposely imagine their lives and the critical experiences that define them. These goals are core to what we envision as a fruitful experience for a student progressing through our learning institutions, and in that context I'll make very brief remarks about one framework and one actual experience. So Jerry asked me to represent today research by a Krannert Center colleague on the possibilities of applying models of student development to arts-based student engagement. And I'm speaking very humbly here, I'm not a student development expert, and I know there are some in the room today, so that's not my role here today, it's just to provide some food for thought. So Julie Rundell is our Assistant Properties Director at Krannert Center. She's also a student. She's pursuing a customized program in which she will eventually receive a master's degree in university-based arts administration from the University of Illinois at Springfield. And she's been looking at student development theory. Ryan and Aaron, I think, provided some background information for her in this work, and we really appreciate that. Student development theory explores the maturation and knowledge processing of students in post-secondary education. It already provides a framework on our campuses for teaching styles, for assessment, and for student affairs professionals. Julie's research led her to a belief that student development theory is not generally being used by campus-based performing arts presenters. She believes that use of these theories can help our engagement work create more positive impact on student learning, personal growth, and enrollment retention, and can make our engagement work increasingly relevant to campus partners, including academic departments and student services. She explores how this area of educational psychology can be incorporated into our arts engagement work with its structure for notions of growth, progression, and increasing capability, judgment, and comfort with ambiguity. In particular, Julie explores Perry's scheme, examining how college students move through stages of learning and their understanding of what it means to know something. A simplified statement, very simplified statement of Perry's stages include dualism, or a division of meaning into two realms, good versus bad, right versus wrong, we versus they, etc. Multiplicity, in which one adds to right and wrong the category of not yet known. This stage admits the legitimacy of diversity of opinion, but doesn't make value distinctions between opinions. Relativism involves diversity of opinion, values, and judgment, and a person starts to look at knowledge in an analytical way. They discover that facts are needed to support opinions, and that some of opinions are more valid than others, depending on context. And a commitment to relativism, in which a personal set of values is developed, allowing navigation through uncertainty. By integrating knowledge with experiences, one's able to commit to solutions because of the ability to reflect on the significance of the situation. But if these stages become too much for any of various reasons, if the person cannot make sense of his or her experience, that person might deflect growth through postponement, escape of responsibility, or a retreat to the dualistic thinking of good versus bad, right versus wrong. The informed use of student development theory, including collaboration with campus partners versed in this work, can help us design specific engagement activities which meet students where they are so that exchange and change can occur, not based on level of experience in the arts as much as where the student is in his or her personal development, not based on what they know, but based on how they think, in order to create the right fit and the most personal growth, intentionally cultivating a process through which students learn to think differently and see more broadly. Chris already spoke about FAA 110, which has been, I think, a terrific place in which these concepts are explored on campus. And Mike briefly mentioned Leora Bressler, who is an absolute fireball of energy in the College of Education. She holds affiliate appointments in art and design and the School of Music as well. And I'd like to talk about her work just a little bit as one example. So her graduate course, Aesthetics and Curriculum, helps students from across the university to synthesize theoretical and experiential perspectives on aesthetic issues. Often these students are also working teachers in the community. They may be from the College of Education, they may be from programs across the university. Classic and state-of-the-art readings on aesthetics are augmented by class experiences of visual art and live performances at Krannert Center. Students rigorously examine the aesthetic meaning of these encounters, including the context in which they are experienced. The visual and performance experiences of the class are chosen by Leora for their communicative and emotive power and variety in modes of representation. In Leora's words, these qualities invite active student engagement and provide a proving ground for the development of critical abilities. the ability to independently acquire knowledge from both textual and non-textual sources, and the ability to perceive, interpret, and evaluate complex ideas, interactions, and patterns in a diversity of forms of human expression. These are the very abilities we need as practicing reflective teachers and as researchers. Students are constantly required to be conscious of the nuances of judgment within observation and to examine where their existing opinions are helpful and where they are limiting. And just to close with an article that Mike shared with us, actually from the Chronicle of Higher Education from September 2016, Lee Bollinger, president of Columbia University, former provost of Dartmouth and president of Michigan, he writes about the responsibility of the rejection of censorship leads to the responsibility to engage in debate. And he says that how students today grapple with ideas, with thoughts and viewpoints in the myriad ways available to them will determine who they are. He expresses hope for a campus environment that allows students to be confident in their beliefs, yet open to alternative perspectives, courageous when confronting evil, able to change their minds when evidence and reason call for a change instead of being myopic and stubborn about things they just don't like or can't refute. We stress being able to suspend our beliefs, to embrace self-doubt, to take joy in learning that we were wrong, to welcome knowing what is not true as another step toward knowing what is true, to be articulate about ideas, to relish complexity, and to use reason while knowing its limits. It's our hope that through Krannert Center's work, that Krannert Center's work will inspire in our students generosity of spirit and the willingness to commit acts of imagination and attention in the mental and physical place where they are now and in the places they will find themselves.
All right, hello. I have less than 10 minutes because we have a tight schedule, so I'm going to be very fast. I want to give 2 case studies, only one of which I'll go into any detail today. One is about both the success and a challenge. We took Brian's edict to us to talk about, what are some of the failures and what are some of the ways in which case studies have not worked out. So I want to talk about this entire season. We're doing a project at Carolina Performing Arts called Sacred Secular, a Sufi Journey. And this is a series of performances by artists from non-Arab Muslim majority nations. And it was created and curated by Emil King, our executive director, working closely with one of our Mellon Distinguished Scholars, a scholar of religious studies. And the goal is in many ways to pick up on Mike's point from earlier this morning, which again, thank you, Mike, for opening these conversations on such a poignant note. This idea of coming to these performances can help students and our audiences come to an understanding that Islam is not a monolithic religion, and that just like any religion, one's identity as a Muslim is an intersection of gender, specific locality, culture, race. All of these factors go into it. I often say, this is actually a series about intersectionality without ever actually using that word. And I have brochures for the season-long series if anyone is interested. But one specific way in which we wanted to really use the opportunity of the season was a word that's been used a lot and will be used a lot in the next couple days, about implicit bias. And the idea is that what would it mean to actually measure the impact of implicit bias in first-year students towards people of Muslim identity as a result of going to these performances? And I've spoken about this project a little bit with people previously. We received a research grant. It's an interdisciplinary grant that UNC offers to faculty from multiple departments who are collaborating. We pulled together faculty from social work, psychology, religious studies, and myself at Carolina Performing Arts to measure what would be the impact of students going to these performances and what would be the impact of students who went to the performance and went to a talk back after the performance. Then our other 2 groups are students who go to a Carolina Performing Arts performance but not related to this season, and then students who were actually told don't come to Memorial Hall this semester at all. It's the only time that we actually tell students don't come to a performance. And I'm happy to go into details offline about the instruments that we have to measure the implicit bias. And essentially it really is what words and ideas and images do students associate when they see images of people who they read as Muslim or who they do not necessarily read as Muslim. And this is building on research that a number of these faculty members have done previously about implicit bias among healthcare providers for Latina populations in North Carolina. So this is building on work that's already had real-world impacts on our state. So, as I said, our hypothesis was coming to these performances and coming to these talkbacks would lower the implicit bias measurements in first-year students. And I personally really believe in this because we talk a lot about the arts are important, the arts are going to make an impact, and I think we saw this afternoon ways in which these clearly are making impacts on individual lives. But how much data do we have? How well do we really understand what specific programs, specific types of programs, and specific types of performances, what are the actual changes they're having in ways that we can then disseminate this information about what does work or what does not work, not only to MUPs, but to the larger presenting audiences. So just to go very quickly, the challenges. This has been a hard project and has not really gotten off the ground in the way in which we wanted, even though we have a great group of experienced researchers and experienced presenters. First was just IRB challenges. Our IRB board wasn't overly familiar with the ways in which we were drawing in all of these different disciplines. The reality of talkbacks with artists, we couldn't articulate exactly what they were going to be, who they were going to be, where they were going to be, and that threw them for a loop. And so it really took us a long time to get through that IRB process. And then the second problem was recruitment. Even though, again, these are researchers who are skilled in finding a recruitment pool, we have great incentives of Amazon gift cards for students who participate. We were trying to reach first-year students, and our first thought was to go through classes, but then that means you have to find a class that's not talking about Islam, that's not talking about art, and is not interested in measuring implicit bias. Because you can't have a conversation in the classroom about this material because then you don't know where that change is coming from. So there's been real challenges for us in terms of recruitment, and we think we have some solutions and some ideas for next semester, but it's been really hard. I mean, Scott's nodding. I'm sure he's seen many experiences where what sounds like a great idea to get this research. This is hard stuff, but it's vitally important, I think, for us to really go forward and to really sort of perpetuate the sort of work and the sort of change that we are interested in seeing. So I do just want to end on a note, and we're not going to have time to show the video that I have with this, but I'm happy to show it to folks later. The event that we will not mention, when it happened, just dumb luck, we happened to have an artist by the name of Nora Chipamire on campus, both on election day, the day after, and then she had a performance on Thursday night. And I still get really emotional when I talk about this. So I was struck by how vital it was to have an artist on campus during that time. For our staff, for me, as well as for the students. And it got me really thinking about what are ways which we can articulate these questions by talking about artists, not just about including diversity in our campus as a whole and creating conversations, but Nora was a real resource akin to mental health services for our students, akin to student services. That there's a way in which, as presenters, we are bringing resources to our campus for our students, especially in times of crisis or anxiety, that makes a real impact on the individual lives and experiences of students, again, as well as staff, and the faculty. And I think the video I have that I'm happy to show to folks is us trying to just really quickly gather interviews from people's experiences. What did it mean to them to have Nora talk to them in class the day after the election, to have a performance and a talk back 2 days after the performance? What was the real value for that? And then what are the ways in which we can tell that story and show that story to administrators, to funders, to help them understand that these sorts of artists on the ground, these sorts of performances, working with students and faculty, really are a vital part of not just the learning experience, but the living experience for our students here on this campus. So I just want to also give one more shout out again to Scott. We are having, thanks to his help, we're going to be having a session about student engagement at APAP, one of the pre-conference sessions on that Friday from 9 to noon. Myself, Matt, folks from Michigan, a number of other places are going to be there. Amy's going to be there. So just spread the word to your networks. We're hoping to continue these conversations, talk about what works and what does not work, provide opportunity for presenters of all shapes and sizes to have conversations about how they can engage with students more deeply, what to do and what not to do, as well as we're actually going to be inviting some artists to share their experiences as well about models of successful engagement for students. So that is all. Thank you. Yeah, just as I mentioned, this is sort of our first draft at how do we tell the story of what it was to have artists on the ground on Election Day. So literally these interviews were done Thursday and Friday. God bless my documentation students edited this on Monday because I was like, I've got to go on a plane, guys. So, but Ryan's actually talk reminded me that it might really be useful to share this.
Didn't know when I was telling people about it. Was it a play? Was it dance? Like it was just really like a performance.
Actually was walking in, and again, that unforgiving space. As soon as I walked in and I sat down, there were these bright halogen lights pointing right into my face.
So the class, we do read scholarship and we read narratives, and so I think it was really the perfect blend. I think her show was such a good intersection of what we've done all semester.
I know a lot of my friends did not go to class, and I remember May was just completely devastated and did not. She didn't leave the room.
That there was a lot of fear on campus. Like the girl that lives across the hall from me was Muslim, is Muslim, I'm sorry, and she was just so fearful and so depressed. And
that was a tricky day. I think a lot of students were visibly devastated.
The moment we all stepped to the back and saw the ring and sat down, she changed our whole atmosphere.
We just moved. She has moved, and that was really healing.
And to encompass a different persona than you necessarily are, what she let us do was a dance movement, kind of that was titled "How to Be a Black Man," and I'm a white woman, so that was, and I'm an actor, but it was very interesting to put on that persona, and I don't know, it was healing, even though it didn't seem related. It was very nice.
And it was a space that I really couldn't have been taken into by a professor. It should have been taken into by a regularly structured class, but this outside artist could kind of change that paradigm a lot.
I think that in some ways, at least in my field of political science, we're sort of not gut checking all the time. I think that she just, everything that she said in class, everything that she presented, it was just really, it hit you in your gut. It's like, oh, that's how it, and it made you feel.
Make of it walking out. I still don't know what to make of it now, but it was through conversations with other students and with professor afterwards that I kind of got the sense of maybe that was the point it was in.
It's a different way of expressing so much. I think it's like science and math and stuff like that. You can express a lot through those topics, but generally a lot more objective. But I think humans aren't just objective beings. Like we
We're
have
not telling the audience what to think. We're opening up questions, and we're opening up, a different way to think about things and all the possibilities and starting conversations. So I think it's really important to start these conversations on a college campus.